Hey Smarties, Blair Imani here. I'm an author, educator, historian, and we're here to get smarter. And today we have a question from a Smartie named Keith. Thanks so much for asking your question, Keith. And this question is, Blair, I'm a black gay man in the UK. Is it LGBT History Month or Black History Month? Which one of my identities do I celebrate first? It's a great question, Keith. Let's get smarter about it. Get smarter with Blair Imani. Before we dive in, today's lesson is brought to you by my Smarties on Patreon. You'll learn more about that community in just a little bit. Keith's question evokes the reality that many of us are forced to choose our different identities and celebrate one of them at a time. But that's not true, and it's not fair. I'm a black bisexual woman, and I'm a black bisexual woman at all times. I'm not just a bisexual woman at some times or a black woman at some times. This is my whole self at all times. And so we have to work to change the landscape of representation to honor that fact. And it really boils down to systems of oppression. Queer antagonism, or harm against queer people or LGBTQ plus people, and anti-black racism, the specific type of racism that harms black people. We also have to understand that within LGBTQ plus spaces, there is sometimes anti-blackness, and within black spaces, there's sometimes homophobia, queer antagonism, transphobia. It means that we have anti-oppression work to do everywhere. So, why is this important? Why do we need Black History Month or specific LGBTQ plus histories? Well, the truth is that because of those systems of oppression that we just discussed, it means that the times when we are allowed to learn about these different groups that are outside of whiteness and straightness and cisgender identity is very few and far between. Of course, the goal is to have human history that represents everyone equally, but we aren't there yet. And as we work toward that, having a dedicated time to focus on Black communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and Black LGBTQ plus figures, it's important that we have these dedicated times. Of course, it might not feel like it's enough, because it isn't. Learning about a community during 1 month out of 12 months is not sufficient whatsoever, but maybe we need to understand how we got here in the first place. In the United States, February is Black History Month, and it's been officially designated as Black History Month since 1976. Of course, it goes all the way back to 1926 with historian Carter G. Woodson's Negro History Week. And with advocacy and civil rights movements and Black Power movements, it evolved over time to becoming an official designation. In the United Kingdom, while we're celebrating Black History Month in the US, in the UK, they're celebrating LGBT History Month. A group of dedicated teachers came together in 2005 to celebrate the abolition of Section 28, which dictated that LGBT curriculum could not be included in UK materials or in media. Something that's super harmful because inclusive education is the goal. Now, this was a case of codified homophobia, and it needed to be done away with. And when it was, the teachers came together to celebrate. And of course, they put a call to action out to other educators to celebrate alongside them. They thought it would be a modest celebration. Maybe their efforts would be recognized by 20 to 30 other people. But instead, it was multiple times over that amount of celebration. And today, over a decade later, we celebrate LGBT History Month in the UK in February, thanks to the work of these teachers. It just goes to show you that just a little bit of people power can go a long way and make a lot of change. In October in the US, we are celebrating LGBT History Month, and in the UK, they are celebrating Black History Month. Just like how in February, we're celebrating Black History Month and they're celebrating LGBT History Month. Almost like we talked about it and tried to twin, but it was just a coincidence. Anyway, the reason why we have LGBT History Month in the US during October is because of the work of educator Rodney Wilson. In 1994, he decided to make October a dedicated LGBT History Month in the US. Rodney chose October because it contains Coming Out Day, it's during the academic calendar year, and because it commemorates the first 2 dedicated LGBTQ plus rights marches on Washington. Black History Month happens in October in the United Kingdom thanks to the work of Akayaba Adai-Sebo. After traveling to the US and seeing the work being done to codify Black History Month here, he went back to the UK and decided to start working toward that. Akayaba chose October for many meaningful reasons, and the fact that it was commemorated in 1987 had very serious meaning as well, important meaning. The 100th birthday of Marcus Garvey, the 25th anniversary of the Organization for African Unity, and the 150th anniversary for Caribbean emancipation, a huge and important time. So in addition to the importance of 1987, October was also significant because it's the harvest time, the time the academic school year begins, and the time where African leaders come together to settle differences between different communities and groups, as well as establish the state of the community, kind of like a reset. So just like we're resetting the school year, resetting in the fall, Black History Month is celebrated right at that time. So going back to Keith's question, we don't have to choose to celebrate ourselves one at a time. We can do it all together. But of course, these dedicated periods are so important as we work towards a collective human history. But before we get smarter about some moments of Black queer history or Black LGBTQ plus history, let's get another message from our sponsors. Today's Get Smarter lesson is brought to you by my Smarties on Patreon. Thank you so much to each and every one of you that decides that I'm worth investing in. Oftentimes, folks like myself, influencers, YouTubers, are supported by brands and sponsors. But a lot of times, I don't agree with the ethics or sustainability practices or labor practices of those sponsors. And saying no is sometimes very expensive. Being supported on Patreon helps me to say no and still sustain my work, still being able to take care of myself and produce amazing content like this video, with work supported by Ann Lesueur, who does my editing, Ren Fernandez Kim, who does my directing, Shelby Rassler, who does my audio, and being able to compensate them accordingly. So I hope that you'll decide to support me on Patreon, and if you do, you'll have a great time with me on there. You get early access to materials and sometimes exclusive access to materials that I don't even make public elsewhere, and you get snapshots into my everyday life, things that I don't feel comfortable discussing on larger platforms. But more important than that, you're supporting the work. The truth is that a lot of people who are very intent on being bigoted and hateful are very well resourced, and I'm not in that boat, and I wouldn't want to be, not if it meant my ethics and integrity. So join me on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Blair Imani. See you there. So, how do we get smarter about Black history and LGBTQ plus history? Well, the important thing to do is to understand that these things are not separate. I mean, sometimes you have the case that somebody's a white LGBTQ plus person, and you do have straight and cisgender Black people, but there's a whole heck of a lot of us who encompass multiple communities at once, such as myself. So, as it relates to Black LGBTQ plus history, let's look at some important moments as we get smarter about these truths in these communities. Looking at the Stonewall Riots, now whether you call it the Stonewall Riots or the Stonewall Uprising, doesn't really matter to me. It's kind of semantics. Some people think that riots are a bad thing, but Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said himself that riots are the language of the unheard, and that certainly was the case in 1969 at the Stonewall Inn. Now, you have to understand that the current state of LGBTQ plus organizing is due large in part to those riots. I mean, the fact that we have Pride Month in June is because of those riots, and it all came out of a visceral response to police violence and respectability. Police came in and attempted to harass and to defile the spaces that have been created by Black LGBTQ plus people. And instead of sitting back and letting oppression happen to them, folks like Marsha P. Johnson took a stand and said, "I'm here, I'm queer, and we demand our rights." Now, that's not a direct quote by any means, but the energy and the message was there. Over that time period, things shifted. I mean, the American Psychological Association, that had previously designated homosexuality as a mental illness, took that out of their definitions. Now, of course, that's not the end of the work that needs to be done, but it's important to understand this in context. Many of the rioters and organizers that shifted the landscape of LGBTQ plus organizing following Stonewall were Black people. Black LGBTQ people, like Marsha P. Johnson. Her very existence not only was revolutionary, but shifted the paradigm and means that we should understand her not only in the context of Black history, but LGBTQ history as well. Stonewall is an example of history that is often exclusively told as LGBTQ plus history, but it's also Black history. Now, let's look at a piece of Black history that is sometimes removed from the context of queer history. The Harlem Renaissance. Personally, the Harlem Renaissance is my favorite part of Black history. I remember being in school and getting to the part where we talked about the 1920s and 30s, and I would see Black history skipped over. The Harlem Renaissance was a beautiful proliferation of arts, of music, of creations, of Black people making beautiful things and being funded by foundations like the Harmon Foundation to do exactly that, without the constraints of their funders, just being able to make beautiful things, kind of like what my patrons helped me do on Patreon. But with the Harlem Renaissance, it wasn't just Black history. while Black creators and thinkers, and I almost said influencers, but they were influential. They were thinking about how to understand Blackness outside of the context of white supremacy. A magazine called Fire, with 2 exclamation points, was devoted to younger Negro artists. Now, in 1926, we have perhaps the first Black and LGBTQ plus created publication by individuals like Richard Bruce Nugent, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Countee Cullen, so many individuals who came together to contribute their materials and to talk about what they were thinking about at the time. Things like gender, things like sexuality, maybe not in those specific terms, but certainly in context. So, we have to understand that this conversation isn't new, that Stonewall isn't just queer history that's whitewashed, no, and that the Harlem Renaissance isn't just Black history that's straight and cis-washed, no, that these things happen simultaneously because people exist as they are simultaneously as Black LGBTQ plus figures, and Black LGBTQ plus people make Black LGBTQ plus history, just like our question of the day from Smartie Keith. I hope I answered your question, Keith, and if you have a question that you'd like to be featured as a question from a Smartie, you can head over to blairimani.com/questions, and I'll do my best to get to it. Either way, chime in below. I want to hear from you. Comment, question, maybe add your own facts so that others can get smarter about LGBTQ plus Black history as well. Well, Smarties, that's another episode of Get Smarter with Blair Imani. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can be the first one to comment on my posts. And while you're here, check out one of my previous videos. Let's keep it going.